Graceland shimmered under the warm Memphis sun. A majestic white mansion surrounded by acres of perfectly manicured lawns. For most of the world, it was the iconic home of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. But for Elvis himself, it was simply home, a place of escape, a haven from the screaming crowds and the relentless glare of fame. He loved Graceland, loved its quiet corners, the way the light hit the stained glass peacocks, the familiar scent of gardenias from the front lawn. And he loved the people who made it run, who kept it pristine and private. Among them was Thomas Henderson, the groundskeeper. Thomas wasn't flashy. He wasn't part of Elvis's inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, who were always buzzing around. Thomas was a quiet man, deliberate in his movements, always clad in sturdy work clothes, his hands calloused from years of tending to the earth. He knew every rose bush, every oak tree, every blade of grass on the estate. His passion was evident in the lush, vibrant gardens that stretched out like emerald carpets. Elvis would often see Thomas in the early mornings, sometimes even before the sun had fully climbed, already out there with his mowers and trimmers. He'd be whistling a tune, a simple, old-fashioned melody, very different from the rock and roll that echoed through the house. Elvis respected Thomas. There was an honesty about him, a quiet dignity that was rare in the world. Elvis inhabited one particular Tuesday. Elvis was feeling restless. The record he was working on wasn't quite coming together, and the upcoming tour dates felt like an endless chain of hotels and crowds. He wandered out onto the portico, a cup of coffee in hand, and watched Thomas meticulously trimming the hedges near the stables. The groundskeeper was so focused, running his hand over the clipped leaves, ensuring every line was perfect. "Mornin', Thomas," Elvis called out, his voice a low rumble even in greeting. Thomas straightened up slowly, pushing his cap back, a faint smile touching his lips. "Morning, Mr. Presley." "Lovely day for it." His voice was soft with a gentle southern lilt. "It is," Elvis agreed, taking a sip of his coffee. "Darden's look mighty fine as always. You got a green thumb, Thomas." A faint blush colored Thomas's cheeks. "Just know a bit about what they need, sir." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the chirping of birds and the distant hum of Memphis waking up. Elvis noticed a slight tremor in Thomas's hand as he adjusted his cap, and a faint line of worry etched around his eyes that wasn't usually there. He looked tired, more tired than usual. "Everything all right, Thomas?" Elvis asked, his gaze direct, but kind. "Just long days, Mr. Presley. The summer heat makes the growth spurt something fierce." He gestured vaguely at the vibrant foliage. Elvis nodded. Sensing Thomas wasn't telling him everything, but not wanting to pry, he knew people had their private burdens. "Well, don't work yourself too hard. We need these gardens looking perfect." He gave a half smile, trying to lighten the mood. "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, picking up his shears. "Always do my best." As Elvis watched Thomas turn back to his work, meticulously shaping the emerald bushes, a faint flicker of concern pricked at him. Thomas wasn't the kind to complain, not ever. He was steadfast, reliable, almost part of the Graceland landscape himself. But there was something in his eyes, a shadow that Elvis couldn't quite place. It wasn't about the heat, he was sure of it. It was something deeper, something heavier. He finished his coffee, his restless feelings still there, now mixed with a quiet, unspoken worry for the man who kept his world so beautiful. He wondered briefly what burdens a man like Thomas Henderson carried away from the watchful eyes of Graceland. Days blurred into weeks for Elvis. There were recording sessions, endless meetings with Colonel Parker about tour, logistics, new movie scripts to read, and the constant stream of friends and family swirling through Graceland. His life was a whirlwind of noise and activity, a never-ending performance. Yet, despite the chaos, the quiet image of Thomas Henderson and the subtle worry etched on his face kept resurfacing in Elvis's mind. He started paying more attention. He'd find himself glancing out the window as he ate breakfast, watching Thomas push the lawnmower, his shoulders hunched a little more than usual. Thomas used to whistle as he worked, sometimes even humming a gospel tune, but lately the gardens were silent except for the whirring of machines. He looked thinner too, and his movements, usually so fluid and strong, seemed to carry a slight stiffness, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. One afternoon, Elvis was down by the stables checking on his horses. He loved these majestic animals. They were a source of peace for him. He saw Mary Ann, the head cook, talking to one of the maids near the back gate. Their voices were low, hushed, almost conspiratorial. As Elvis approached, their conversation paused, and they quickly turned to him with bright, polite smiles. "Mr. Presley," Mary Ann said, her plump face creasing into a warm smile. "Just admiring the azaleas Thomas has got blooming. Aren't they something?" "They are," Elvis agreed, but his eyes were on them, sensing the change in their demeanor. "Everything all right over here?" Mary Ann exchanged a quick glance with the maid. "Just talking, sir. About Thomas," Elvis prompted gently, surprising himself with his directness. He wasn't usually one to meddle in staff gossip, but his concern for Thomas was growing. Mary Ann sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Oh, bless his heart, it's his boy Billy. He's not doing so good." Elvis's blood ran a little cold. Billy? He knew Thomas had a son, a young boy maybe 7 or 8 years old. He'd seen him once or twice a long time ago. A bright-eyed little fellow, not doing good, he repeated, his voice low with concern. "What's wrong?" Mary Ann wrung her hands. "It's been going on for a while now. He's got some kind of rare blood condition, they say. Weakens him, makes him tired all the time. And the treatments, well, they're not easy, and they cost a fortune for boys." Hushed. "Poor little mite. Thomas and his wife Clara. They've been in and out of school. Thomas never says anything, of course. Too proud, but you can see it's eating him up inside." Elvis felt a knot tighten in his stomach. A sick child, that was a heavy burden for any parent. He thought of his own childhood, how lucky he'd been, how healthy. He thought of his mother Gladys, and how fiercely she protected him. He imagined the fear and helplessness Thomas must be feeling. He thanked Mary Ann and the maid, his mind already churning. He walked back towards the house, the vibrant colors of the garden now seeming to mock the unseen struggle happening just beyond Graceland's walls. He saw Thomas in the distance, still working, his back to the house. He looked so small from this vantage point, so burdened. That night, Elvis couldn't sleep. He lay awake, the image of Thomas's strained face and the words, "rare blood condition," echoing in his mind. He was Elvis Presley, the king, with all the money and influence in the world, yet here was a good man working hard right under his nose, struggling with something so profoundly painful. It felt wrong. He knew he had to do something, but what a simple donation didn't feel like enough. This wasn't just about money, it was about a child's life, a family's hope. Quiet worry had now settled deep within him, a persistent hum he couldn't ignore. He decided then and there that he couldn't just stand by. The next 2 days, Elvis made it his mission to learn more about Billy Henderson's condition, all without directly approaching Thomas. He knew Thomas was a private man and he didn't want to make him uncomfortable or feel like charity. So he subtly pressed Mary Ann and other staff members for more details, piecing together the story like a detective. He learned that Billy was diagnosed with something called Atypical Anemia, a rare and aggressive blood disorder that left him constantly fatigued, prone to infections, and in need of frequent complex blood transfusions. The doctors were exploring a bone marrow transplant as the only long-term solution, but finding a match was difficult, and the procedure itself was incredibly expensive and risky. The Henderson family had spent every dime they had, and then some just on the preliminary tests and the ongoing transfusions. Elvis watched Thomas with new eyes. He noticed how Thomas would occasionally pause, leaning on his rake, looking off into the distance with a haunted expression before shaking himself and returning to work. He saw him eating his lunch alone, a simple sandwich, instead of joining the other staff. One afternoon, Elvis saw Thomas sitting on a garden bench, hunched over a stack of papers, probably medical bills. His shoulders seemed to slump even lower as he scanned them. He rubbed his temples, a gesture of profound weariness, and then slowly folded the papers, tucking them back into a worn envelope. The sight of Thomas's silent struggles stirred something deep within Elvis. He remembered his own humble beginnings, the struggles his family faced, how close they were to poverty. He understood the feeling of being helpless in the face of overwhelming odds. But he also knew he was no longer that poor boy from Tupelo. He had resources, connections, a level of influence that was almost unimaginable. He thought about the extravagant gifts he often gave. Cadillacs for friends, diamond rings, generous cash handouts to anyone who asked. Those gifts were easy. They were a way of sharing his immense fortune, a way of showing love and appreciation. But this felt different. This wasn't about buying a fleeting moment of happiness. It was about saving a life, about lifting an impossible burden. "Mr. Presley," Mary Ann said one morning, finding him unusually contemplative in the kitchen, sipping black coffee. "Thomas had to leave early today. Billy had another turn, had to rush him back to the hospital for a transfusion." Her voice was laced with sympathy. Elvis's jaw tightened. "How bad was it?" "Bad enough that Thomas looked like he'd seen a ghost," she replied, shaking her head. "Said the boy was pale as a sheet. Just broke my heart." Elvis pushed his coffee cup away. He was a proud man, determined to handle his own burdens, but sometimes pride could be a silent killer. This wasn't a matter of dignity anymore. It was a matter of life and death. He spent the rest of the day pacing the house. He tried to play his guitar, but the music felt hollow. His usual methods of escaping his thoughts weren't working. He realized that this wasn't just a passing concern. This was a direct challenge to his own humanity, to what he believed in. He had to act. But how? How do you offer help to someone who won't ask for it, especially when the problem is so vast? He knew he couldn't just hand Thomas a check. Thomas would likely refuse it or accept it with such discomfort that it would feel wrong. No, this had to be different. It had to be a gesture that went beyond money, beyond simple charity. It had to be something that addressed the root of the problem, that gave Thomas and his family real, lasting hope. He needed to find a way to make the impossible possible for Billy Henderson. The weight of Thomas's unspoken burden had become Elvis's own. He had the resources, the power, the fame. Now he just needed the plan. The next morning, Elvis decided to make his first move. He wanted to offer help, but gently testing the waters. He called his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who usually handled all his finances. "Colonel Elvis," said, his voice unusually serious, "I need you to put together a substantial bonus for Thomas Henderson, the groundskeeper. Make it say $5,000 just for his excellent work." He knew it was a lot, especially for a bonus, but it felt like a start. Colonel Parker, ever the shrewd businessman, raised an eyebrow. "5,000, Elvis? That's quite generous. Is there a special occasion?" "Just appreciating good work, Colonel," Elvis deflected. "And make it discreet. Don't make a big show of it." A few days later, Thomas received an extra envelope in his pay. He opened it, his brow furrowing as he saw the amount. $5,000. He stood there holding the crisp bills, a bewildered look on his face. He found Mary Ann in the kitchen. "Mary Ann," he said, his voice quiet. "Did Mr. Presley authorize this? This is too much. It must be a mistake." Mary Ann, who had been clued in by one of Elvis's assistants, smiled kindly. "No mistake, Thomas. Mr. Presley just wanted to show his appreciation for all your hard work. Said he noticed how beautiful the gardens look." Thomas stared at the money, then at Mary Ann. He knew it was meant as a kindness, and his heart swelled with gratitude. But he also knew what it wouldn't do. $5,000 was a lot, yes. But it was a drop in the ocean compared to the bills piling up for Billy's atypical anemia treatments. It wouldn't cover the specialized medications, the frequent hospital stays, or the crushing cost of a potential bone marrow transplant. It might buy a little time, a temporary reprieve, but not a solution. He thought of Billy, pale and weak in his hospital bed. He thought of Clara, his wife, exhausted from sleepless nights by their son's side. They needed a miracle, not just a temporary bonus. He was a proud man, and while he was grateful, accepting this amount felt like admitting defeat, like accepting a temporary bandage on a gaping wound. Later that day, Thomas approached Elvis, who was sitting by the pool strumming his guitar. "Mr. Presley," Thomas said, his voice a little shaky, holding out the envelope. Elvis looked up, sensing the discomfort in Thomas's posture. "Thomas, what is it, sir?" "About this," Thomas said, indicating the money. I appreciate it truly. It's too much. I can't accept it. I just do my job. Elvis put his guitar down. It's not too much, Thomas. It's what you deserve. Your work keeps this place beautiful. I understand that, sir. And I'm grateful, Thomas insisted, his gaze fixed on the ground. But it won't make a difference to what we're facing. Not really. It's a long road with Billy, sir. And it's not just money. We need... It's hope. And I don't know where to find that. His voice cracked on the last word and he quickly cleared his throat, embarrassed by his rare show of emotion. Elvis looked at Thomas, truly seeing the depth of his pain, the silent burden he carried. He saw the pride in Thomas's refusal of the money and the quiet desperation in his voice when he spoke of hope. This wasn't about a financial shortfall. It was about a medical impossibility, a terrifying future. A standard handout wouldn't fix it. Thomas was right. It wouldn't make a difference where it truly counted. Elvis leaned back in his chair, a sudden realization dawning on him. He had been thinking too small. He had been thinking like Elvis Presley, the generous employer, instead of Elvis Presley, the king, with access to almost limitless resources and connections. This problem required more than money. It required a grand gesture, something that only he with his unique position in the world could provide. He took the envelope from Thomas, tucking it into his own pocket. "All right, Thomas," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I understand. Thank you for your honesty." Thomas looked surprised, then relieved, though a touch of shame still lingered in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Presley." He turned to go back to his work, but Elvis called after him. "Thomas. Wait. You said it's hope you need, right? Not just money." Thomas turned back, a flicker of confusion in his weary eyes. "Yes, sir. Hope that Billy can get better, that he can have a future." Elvis nodded, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face. "All right, Thomas, then I think I might just know where to find you that hope. Go on home now. Rest up. I'll be in touch." Thomas looked utterly bewildered, but nodded, a tiny seed of wonder planted in his heart. As he walked away, Elvis picked up his guitar again. But he wasn't strumming. He was thinking, plotting. He was going to find Thomas Henderson, that hope. And it was going to be beyond anything anyone could ever imagine. That evening, Graceland was buzzing with a different kind of energy. Elvis had called for a meeting with his closest inner circle, Joe Esposito, his road manager and good friend, Marty Lacker, one of his longtime buddies, and his cousin, Billy Smith. These were the men he trusted most, the ones who saw past the king to the person underneath. They sat in the living room, the grand piano silent, the usually boisterous room hushed. Elvis paced, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. He felt a fire in his belly, a burning need to do something monumental. "All right, fellas," Elvis began, his voice low and serious. "You know Thomas Henderson, our groundskeeper." They all nodded. They knew Thomas, the quiet, hard-working man who kept Graceland looking like a postcard. "His son, Billy, is gravely ill," Elvis continued, explaining the details he'd gathered about atypical anemia, the constant transfusions, the immense financial strain, and the desperate search for a bone marrow match. Thomas tried to refuse a bonus I gave him today, said it wasn't enough, said he needed hope. Marty scratched his chin. "Poor guy." "It's tough, Elvis, but what can we do? We can donate, help with the bills, but if it's a rare condition and they need a match..." "Exactly," Elvis exclaimed, stopping his pacing to fix them with an intense gaze. "Money on its own isn't enough. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a dam. This boy needs the absolute best care in the world. He needs a cure. And if that means finding a doctor, then that's what we're gonna do." Joe Esposito looked thoughtful. "So, you're thinking about setting up a fund for him, a serious one?" "More than a fund, Joe," Elvis said, his eyes gleaming with a newfound purpose. "Think about it. We've got the private plane, we've got connections. not just in music, but everywhere. People know me. People listen when I call." He paused, letting the idea solidify in his mind. This boy needs a bone marrow transplant. That means finding a very specific match and then getting him to a facility that can handle such a delicate procedure. It's cutting-edge stuff. Billy Smith frowned. "Elvis, that kind of medical science is way beyond us. And finding a donor for a rare blood type, that's like finding a needle in a haystack across the entire country. Then we'll find the biggest haystack in the country, and we'll turn it over until we find that needle," Elvis declared, his voice gaining strength. "This isn't about just paying a few bills. This is about using everything I have, everything we are, to save this little boy's life." He walked over to a map of the United States hanging on the wall. His finger traced a path from Memphis to a dot on the East Coast. "I heard about a new research hospital in Boston. They specialize in rare blood disorders. They've got some of the brightest minds, the best technology." He paused, his gaze fixed on the map. "What if we don't just pay for his treatment? What if we bring the best treatment to him, or take him to the best treatment?" The room was silent as his friends processed the sheer scale of what he was proposing. This wasn't an ordinary act of charity. This was a full-blown personal mission. "Elvis, are you saying you want to use your plane, your staff, your everything to fly this boy to Boston and make sure he gets the best doctors, no matter the cost?" Joe asked, his voice full of awe. "Exactly," Elvis said, turning to them, his eyes burning with conviction. "This is a commitment to give Billy Henderson a fighting chance, a full life." The men stared at him, stunned. It was beyond belief. To mobilize the resources of the king of rock and roll for one groundskeeper's son for a private medical mission of this magnitude. It was unprecedented. "It's huge, Elvis," Marty finally managed, shaking his head slowly. "It's a whole operation." "Then let's call it Operation Little King," Elvis said, a determined smile on his face. "'Cause every child deserves a chance to be king of their own life, and Billy Henderson is going to get his chance." The skepticism in the room slowly melted away, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. They knew Elvis when he set his mind to something. He made it happen, and this time it wasn't about records or tours or movies. This was about a boy's life, and for Elvis, that was more important than anything else. The wheels were beginning to turn. The days that followed were a whirlwind of hushed conversations and clandestine arrangements. Elvis had tasked Joe Esposito and Marty Lacker with the logistics. They were his go-to guys for sensitive missions, and they understood the need for absolute discretion. This wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a deeply personal crusade for Elvis. First, they began contacting medical professionals. Elvis, through his personal doctor and various connections, started reaching out to top specialists in hematology, particularly those at the renowned Boston Children's Hospital, which had a reputation for groundbreaking work in rare blood disorders. The name Elvis Presley opened doors that would otherwise remain firmly shut. Doctors, initially surprised by the directness of the inquiry from the king himself, listened intently as Elvis explained Billy's situation with genuine concern. "We need the best, doctor," Elvis would say on the phone, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes, whatever he needs cost is no object. My only concern is this boy's life." Meanwhile, Marty was working on the travel arrangements. Elvis's private jet, the Lisa Marie, typically used for glamorous tours and celebrity escapades, was now being prepared for a very different kind of passenger. Marty ensured that a medical team would be on board with all necessary equipment ready for any emergency. He also began looking into comfortable, long-term accommodations near the Boston Hospital for Thomas and Clara. Elvis himself focused on the most delicate part, finding a potential bone marrow donor. He knew it was a long shot, but he was determined. Couldn't just put out a public appeal, as that would draw unwanted attention and turn Billy's private struggle into a media circus. Instead, he worked through medical channels, quietly funding and facilitating a nationwide search within existing donor registries, using his connections to speed up the process and broaden the search parameters. He paid for extra tests, for expedited analyses, anything that could give Billy a better chance. Thomas Henderson, meanwhile, continued his work at Graceland. Oblivious to the grand plan unfolding around him, he noticed a few strange things, though. Elvis seemed to be around more often, sometimes watching him with a curious, almost protective gaze. There were more hushed phone calls from the house, and Elisa Marie was undergoing extensive checks, even though no tour dates were immediately announced. One afternoon, Elvis approached Thomas as he was pruning roses. "Thomas," he said, his voice casual, "how's Billy doing these days? Any good news from the doctors?" Thomas sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Still the same, Mr. Presley. Weekly transfusions. They're still looking for a bone marrow match. But it's like looking for a ghost. Says it's a very particular type." He shook his head. "That's all we can do now." Elvis nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Prayers are good, Thomas. But sometimes God sends a helping hand too. Have they mentioned any specialized treatments? Maybe in other states, if a match could be found?" Thomas shrugged. Elvis met his gaze, a quiet intensity in his eyes. "Dreams can come true, Thomas. Sometimes, just sometimes." He gave Thomas a reassuring pat on the shoulder. A gesture that surprised the groundskeeper with its unexpected warmth. As Elvis walked away, Thomas watched him, a flicker of bewildered hope mixing with his usual weariness. What did Mr. Presley mean by that? He dismissed it as just a kind word, the way famous wealthy people sometimes spoke. He couldn't possibly imagine the web of connections and resources that were at that very moment being woven for his son. Operation Little King was in full swing, and its unsuspecting target was about to have his world and his son's future changed forever. The day arrived. Elvis had arranged for Thomas and Clara to meet him in the former living room, a place they rarely entered. Thomas was nervous, adjusting his tie. Clara smoothing her dress. They assumed it was about some new urgent landscaping project, or perhaps a temporary transfer of duty. They never imagined the true reason. Is something wrong, Mr. Presley?" Clara whispered, tears already welling in her eyes. "No, Clara, nothing wrong," Elvis said quickly, reaching out a reassuring hand. "Quite the opposite, actually. I've been working on something to help Billy." He took a deep breath. "Thomas, you said you needed hope, not just money, and I meant it when I said I'd find it for you." He looked directly at them, his eyes full of earnest conviction. "For the past few weeks, my team and I have been arranging for Billy to receive the absolute best medical care in the country." Thomas frowned, still confused. "The best, Mr. Presley? We're doing all we can here at St. Jude." "St. Jude is a wonderful hospital, Thomas," Elvis acknowledged. "But for atypical anemia, there's a leading research facility, a specialist team at Boston Children's Hospital, the Turee. They're doing groundkeeper. They're the cons for danger." "Cost is covered, Thomas," Elvis interrupted, his voice unwavering. "We've also been quietly searching for a compatible bone marrow donor through various registries. We have some promising leads, and the Boston team believes they can find a match." Thomas and Clara sat frozen, their minds struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what they were hearing. It was too much, too big, too unbelievable. "And it's not just Billy," Elvis continued, his voice softening. "We want you both to be with him. My private jet, the Lisa Marie, is being prepped as we speak. It's equipped with all the medical necessities to ensure Billy travels in comfort and safety with a medical team on board. We've also arranged for a comfortable apartment for you both in Boston, just minutes from the hospital, for as long as you need to be there." Silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by Clara's soft sobs. Her face was streaked with tears, but they were tears of overwhelming relief and disbelief. Thomas sat utterly speechless, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes wide and shining. He looked from Elvis to Joe to Marty, as if expecting them to burst out laughing and declare it all a cruel joke. "Mr. Presley," Thomas finally managed his voice, barely a whisper thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. We can't accept this. It's too much. You've already done so much for us." Elvis leaned forward, his gaze piercing. The Graceland Gardens wouldn't be the same without your full attention when you get back. Thomas finally broke. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks, silent and heartfelt. Clara reached over and squeezed his hand, her own body trembling with emotion. They had prayed for a miracle, and now it was standing right in front of them, dressed in a silk shirt and a kind smile. "Tomorrow morning," Elvis said, his voice firm but gentle. "My car will pick you and Billy up at 7 a.m. Be ready." This is his chance, Thomas. His chance for hope. Thomas could only nod, his voice lost to the lump in his throat. He looked at Elvis, the superstar, the king, but all he saw was a man with the biggest heart he'd ever known, a man who had just handed his family the greatest gift imaginable, the promise of a future. The following morning, a sleek, black limousine pulled up to the modest Henderson family home. Thomas, Clara, and Billy were waiting, a small suitcase each, their faces a mixture of apprehension and awe. Billy, pale and thin, clutched a worn teddy bear, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and childlike wonder. He hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of what was happening, only that he was going on a big trip. Elvis wasn't in the car, but Joe Esposito greeted them with a warm, reassuring smile. "Good morning, Henderson family. Are we ready for our adventure?" They nodded, and Joe helped Billy carefully into the spacious back seat, ensuring he was comfortable. The drive to the airport was quick and quiet. When they arrived at the private hangar, Billy's eyes lit up. Not just any plane was waiting on the tarmac, but the majestic Lisa Marie Elvis's custom-designed Convair 880 jet gleaming under the morning sun. It looked like something out of a dream. As they approached the gangway, Elvis himself emerged from the plane, a radiant smile on his face. He was dressed casually in a tracksuit, looking less like a rock star and more like a concerned friend. "Billy, my man," Elvis boomed softly, bending down to the boy's level, ready to fly higher than a kite. Billy, usually shy, managed a weak smile. "Good, because we're going to get you all fixed up all right. You're going to be running around Graceland again in no time." He exchanged a heartfelt look with Thomas and Clara, a silent promise in his eyes. A small medical team was already on board, 2 nurses and a doctor, all prepared for Billy's specific needs. They greeted Billy warmly, checking his vitals immediately, but with the gentlest touch. The interior of the plane was plush and comfortable, more like a luxurious living room than an aircraft. There was a special bed prepared for Billy in one section, ensuring he could rest comfortably during the flight. As the plane taxied and then soared into the sky, Thomas and Clara sat holding hands, looking out the window at the receding landscape of Memphis. It felt surreal, like a dream. Their son, who had been struggling for so long, was now being flown by Elvis Presley, the king, to the best hospital in the country. Elvis spent much of the flight by Billy's side. He told him stories, simple, funny anecdotes about his dogs, about learning to play the guitar, about mischievous pranks he'd pulled as a kid. He sang a few quiet, sweet melodies, not his usual booming hits, but gentle lullabies that soothed Billy into a peaceful sleep. He even let Billy touch his famous gold ring. "You're going to be strong, Billy," Elvis whispered as the boy drifted off, his small hand still holding onto Elvis's finger. "You're going to be so strong." Thomas and Clara watched, tears silently streaming down their faces. This wasn't just a rich man's grand gesture. This was genuine personal kindness. Elvis wasn't just financing their son's future. He was personally investing his time, his compassion, his very essence into it. Upon arrival in Boston, a medical ambulance was waiting directly on the tarmac. Billy was carefully transferred, and Elvis rode in the ambulance with them, ensuring every step of the process was smooth. At Boston Children's Hospital, a team of specialists was ready. They whisked Billy away for immediate assessments, explaining every step to Thomas and Clara. Elvis made sure the Hendersons were settled into their apartment first, checking that everything was to their liking, that they had food and comfort. He didn't leave until he had personally spoken with the leading doctor, receiving a full briefing on Billy's condition and the planned course of action. "We'll do everything in our power, Mr. Presley," the doctor assured him, clearly impressed by Elvis's dedication. "With this level of support, Billy has the best possible chance." As Elvis finally prepared to fly back to Memphis, leaving Joe and Marty to oversee things in Boston, he felt a profound sense of peace. He'd done something truly meaningful. He hadn't just signed a check. He had opened his entire world to a family in desperate need. King of rock and roll had become a quiet guardian, ushering in a journey of hope for a little boy named Billy Henderson. Weeks turned into months. The Graceland gardens, though still immaculate under the care of Thomas's temporary replacement, felt a little different without the quiet presence of Thomas himself. But Elvis received regular updates from Boston, and each positive report filled him with a quiet satisfaction that surpassed any applause from a concert hall. Billy Henderson was responding well to the specialized treatments. The team at Boston Children's Hospital was indeed extraordinary. They discovered a highly compatible bone marrow donor through the nationwide search, and after a grueling but successful transplant procedure, Billy began the long road to recovery. The rare atypical anemia which had plagued his young life was finally, truly in remission. Elvis would often call Joe Esposito in Boston, not just for clinical updates, but for personal ones. "How's Billy's spirit?" He'd ask, "Is he smiling? Is he eating his mama's cooking?" Joe would relay the good news. Billy was slowly gaining weight. His color was returning, and most importantly, he was starting to play. He'd send Elvis photos, Billy in his hospital bed, then later in a wheelchair, and finally walking a weak but determined smile on his face in one picture. He was even drawing his favorite pastime. Thomas and Clara were always there, their faces slowly shedding the years of worry and fear. They would call Graceland regularly, speaking to Elvis directly, their voices filled with choked-up gratitude. "Mr. Presley," Thomas said on one call, his voice rough with emotion. He's truly getting better. He played outside today just for a few minutes, but he played. We never thought we'd see that again." "That's the best news I could ever hear, Thomas," Elvis replied, a genuine warmth spreading through him. "Just keep focus on Billy. Don't you worry about a thing." Elvis continued to ensure all expenses were covered, not just for Billy's medical care, but for the Henderson family's living expenses in Boston. He even sent thoughtful gifts, books for Billy, comfortable new clothes for Thomas and Clara, and knowing Thomas's quiet passion, a rare gardening book for him. This entire experience had a profound impact on Elvis. He was famous, wealthy beyond imagination, but often he felt a hollowness, a disconnect. His life was a performance, a constant demand for attention, but this act of quiet, selfless generosity filled that void. It connected him to a simple fundamental truth about humanity, that caring for one another was the most powerful thing of all. He wasn't just a rock star anymore. He was a lifeline. He remembered the look in Thomas's eyes that day. He refused the money, the quiet desperation for hope. And now, seeing the hope bloom in the form of a recovering child, it was more fulfilling than any gold record. He began to think more about how he could use his influence for good, not just through public charities, but through personal, apple gestures. He understood now that true generosity wasn't about the size of the check, but the depth of the commitment. One day Thomas called, his voice beaming. "Mr. Presley, the doctors say Billy can come home next month. He's strong enough for the journey. They'll still need to monitor him." "Of course, but he's out of the woods." Elvis let out a whoop of joy. "That's fantastic, Thomas. Absolutely fantastic. I'll send the plane for you. Make sure you all travel first class, every comfort." He hung up the phone, a wide, genuine smile on his face. King of rock and roll had orchestrated a miracle, not on a stage, but in the quiet corridors of a hospital, for a groundskeeper's son. And in doing so, he had healed a little bit of his own heart, too. The day Billy Henderson returned to Graceland was a quiet celebration. The Lisa Marie once again landed at the private airfield, this time carrying a much healthier, if still slightly frail, young boy. Elvis was there, waiting, his smile broad and genuine. Billy, a little taller, a little less pale, ran towards Elvis, a feat he couldn't have dreamed of just months ago. Elvis knelt, opening his arms, and Billy threw himself into a hug. "Mr. Presley, I'm better," Billy exclaimed, his voice clear and full of newfound energy. "You sure are, little king," Elvis said, pulling him close, a lump forming in his throat. He looked at Thomas and Clara, their faces beaming with a profound joy he'd never seen before. Thomas's eyes met Elvis's, a silent message of eternal gratitude passing between them. Life slowly returned to a semblance of normal. Thomas Henderson resumed his duties as groundskeeper, his whistle now a regular cheerful sound in the gardens. He still worked with dedication, but now there was a lightness in his step, a peace in his eyes. Clara often brought Billy to Graceland after school, just to sit on the porch, swing, or play quietly in the vast green lawns. Elvis, despite his demanding schedule, often made time to see Billy. He'd teach him simple chords on his guitar or tell him stories about his childhood. In Tupelo, Billy, no longer confined by his illness, blossomed. He still needed regular checkups and medication, but the life-threatening danger was gone. He could run, laugh, and dream of a future, all thanks to the extraordinary kindness of Elvis Presley. One sunny afternoon, Elvis watched from the living room window as Billy, robust and full of energy, chased a butterfly through the azalea bushes that Thomas had so lovingly tended. Thomas was nearby pruning a rose bush. A contented hum on his lips, Elvis reflected on the past year. He had given away Cadillacs, diamond rings, and countless sums of money. But none of those gestures had felt as profoundly meaningful as this. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about saving a life, about alleviating unimaginable suffering. It had taught him the true power of his fame, the real potential of his wealth. It wasn't just for luxury or for buying things. It was for making a real, tangible difference in someone's world. The story of Elvis's gesture for Billy never became a public spectacle. Elvis ensured that it remained a private miracle, a bond forged in compassion between a king and his groundskeeper, and a testament to the quiet, powerful goodness that resided in the heart of Elvis Presley. Years passed. Billy grew up healthy and strong, forever grateful for the second chance he was given. He would often visit Graceland, not just to see Thomas, but to spend time with Elvis, who remained a guiding light in his life. The magnificent gardens flourished, reflecting the peace and gratitude that permeated the estate. Elvis Presley was and always would be the king of rock and roll, but to the Henderson family, and to Elvis himself, in the quiet depths of his own heart, he was something more. He was the man who, with a kindness beyond belief, had saved a little boy's life and woven a legacy of hope and compassion into the very fabric of Graceland. And that, he knew, was the greatest hit of all.